Good evening. My name is Phil Easter, historian and writer from Baltimore, Maryland, also known as the Amazing Memory Man. This is the 7th story on my YouTube channel, which I started last year in December 2021. And today I want to share with you some photographs I took at the 1972 Munich Olympic Games. About a month ago, I did a story on Munich where I just talked about the major events that took place, the great athletic performances by athletes like Mark Spitz, Olga Korbut, Frank Shorter, and Lasse Viren, and also about the terrible tragedy that took place on September 5th and 6th, 1972, when 11 athletes from Israel were taken hostage by terrorists and murdered. But today I will share photographs of many of the athletic events I saw. We were recording this today on Sunday, August 28th, 2022. Indeed, it was exactly 50 years ago today that Mark Spitz won his first gold medal in swimming at the Munich Olympics. He would go on to win a total of 7 gold medals between August 28th and September 4th, 1972. That record stood for many years. It seemed unbreakable in the opinion of many people, but then in 2008, the great American swimmer Michael Phelps, who comes from this area, the Baltimore area, he won 8 gold medals at the Beijing Olympics, which is now the record for one Olympics. But Mark Spitz was a great swimmer and certainly set a great standard at the Munich Olympics in 1972. Well, we had tickets, my mom and I had tickets for just the last 4 days of those Olympics. So we did not see Mark Spitz in person, but we watched many of the events of the first week or so on TV before we left the United States. And we saw Olga Korbut, the Soviet gymnast, become one of the most famous women gymnasts ever. And we flew from New York to Copenhagen, Denmark on September 1st, night of September 1st, arriving September 2nd, and stayed in Copenhagen several days. On the night of September 5th, we took a train to Munich, arriving early morning on September 6th. While we were on that train that night, a number of men who were from the country of Denmark were listening to a transistor radio. They seemed very nervous and excitable, and we weren't sure what was happening. We did not speak German or Danish, and they were listening to a radio, and one of them spoke some English and came over and told my mom and me that this terrible event was taking place in Munich. People have been shot. Munich is closed down, the man said. Well, the city wasn't really closed down, but these early reports when tragedies happen, it's hard to know all the details exactly, but we did not know who had been shot. We weren't sure just how great the tragedy was and what was happening. We did not get any sleep that night on the train. When we arrived on the morning of the 6th, we found out that it was 11 athletes from Israel who had been killed by the terrorists, and also one German police officer trying to help them. So 12 innocent people died, and also 5 of the 8 terrorists died, and 3 were captured. So the International Olympic Committee was faced with a very difficult decision. Nothing like this had ever happened in Olympic history, people being murdered at the Olympics. So some people said, well, how can you continue the games? Other people said, well, you should continue, or otherwise the terrorists are winning, and it's not fair to the athletes who not yet competed in those sports. So what they decided to do was to have one day of official mourning. They had a ceremony at the stadium, and many athletes of many countries attended. But unfortunately, the athletes from the Soviet Union and many Eastern European countries allied to the Soviet Union, they did not attend. Their team officials and coaches ordered them not to attend the ceremony because politically they did not like Israel in certain political matters. But I think that's terrible. I mean, you think when people have been murdered, you put all that aside and, you know, honor those athletes who died. But the ones from the Eastern Bloc countries, as we called it at that time, did not come, including East Germany. We must remember that at that time, Germany was divided into East and West. West Germany was a democracy, and East Germany was a communist country allied to the Soviet Union. And now, of course, Germany united on October 3rd, 1990. And since then, of course, they have one Olympic team, since politically it is one nation again. Well, it was a very sad event, and it was shocking. You know, we were looking forward to the sports events, and we still did go and enjoy them, but it was just a terrible shock that this event had happened. So, the tickets I have, the events took place 24 hours after the date on the ticket, because, you know, everything was pushed back one day. The last 4 days of the Munich Olympics should have been September 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th, but instead it was September 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th. And so this is the photo album I've had now for half a century. It's how they say Munich in German. We'll get that shot. And here I will show you some photographs I took. Also in the area of Munich, there's a very beautiful palace in the area. And one day I took this photo, this lantern at the palace, and in the background it got this fountain in the distance. See, had it lined up inside the lantern, it looks like. And here's the beautiful Olympic flame, of course, at every Olympics, the Olympic flame. I took this picture, actually it was the last day of the games on September 11th, 1972. In the afternoon, we had events for the equestrian horse jumping events, and that was followed by the closing ceremony on September 11th, 1972. Again, it should have been September 10th, but the tragedy pushed things back one day. Now here, the first event we saw was a rowing competition, and here's the ticket. It's nice, you could keep most of the ticket. They just tore up a little bit here, and you could keep the rest of the ticket. Everything printed in German, French, and English. The official languages of every Olympics are English, French, and then the language of the host country. Of course, sometimes if it's held in an English-speaking country like the United States or Great Britain or Canada, and then they just use English or French, or it's going to be in Paris 2 years from now in 2024, so I'm pretty sure it'll just be French and English. But when the language of the host country is something else, then you have three languages. All the announcements are made in Munich were German, French, and English in that order. The medal ceremonies, when athletes won the gold, silver, and bronze medals, for example. And here's pictures of the venue where the rowing competition took place on September 8th. And again, I'd like to point out, the European way, they number the tickets day, month, and year. Here in the United States, most people number things month, day, and year. So this is actually listed the 7th of September, not July 9th. See, some Americans might think that would be July 9th, but actually it's the 7th of September. But really took place on the 8th, a day later, as I explained before. The tickets we have were all 1 day later, as opposed to the people who were there for the first 10 days or so of the Munich Olympics. Now, this is from a couple of basketball games I saw before the gold medal game. I'll talk about that later. There were some other countries playing basketball, Spain and West Germany, and I think Japan and the Philippines. And this is the Olympic Park area, and some of the flags. And we also saw judo, a judo competition. This is a ticket for the judo, and I took 2 pictures. My camera did not work too well indoors, so I did not take pictures of the basketball game, but at least we got some pictures here of the judo. And now we go on to what happened. The the gold medal basketball game was between the United States and the Soviet Union. It began about 11:30 at night on September 9th. And so it would go past midnight. Did not end until about 1:30 in the morning, which technically was September 10th in Munich. Of course, in the United States, that was still the afternoon and early evening of September 9th. But where we were, it's a 6-hour time difference between Munich, Germany, and the United States East Coast. So this game did not begin until almost midnight. And the United States had never lost a basketball game in Olympic history, going back to 1936 when the games in Berlin was the first time basketball became an Olympic sport. Of course, the modern games began in 1896 in Athens, but certain sports come in later, and so basketball became an Olympic sport in 1936. The United States won every game and the gold medal in 36, 48, 52, 56, 60, 64, and 68. And at this point in Munich, they'd won every game until this gold medal game. So you can see what happened was the game was very close, and the U.S. was up by 1 point, 50-49, with 3 seconds left. And the game ended. It seemed like the United States won. But then, not so fast. The president of the International Basketball Federation, a certain Dr. Jones, came out of the stands, and he ordered the Brazilian referee to put 3 seconds back up on the clock. In that time, one of the Soviet Union's best players scored the winning basket, 51-50. Well, that was a very controversial decision, and most people thought it was wrong. People were very upset. There was no medal ceremony that night. The next day, the medal ceremony took place somewhere, and not many people were invited to it. The Soviet Union won the gold medal. The United States players refused to accept their silver medals. All 12 players on the United States team, including Tom McMillan, a great player at that time at the University of Maryland. And he later became a congressman, I think from the state of Pennsylvania. He served a couple of terms in Congress later on. But the 12 American players felt like they were robbed, and I agree. This was not right. They refused to accept the silver medals, and to this day, those medals are kept in a safe deposit box somewhere in Munich. But when we got back very late at night to our guest house, the next morning, actually, we had this letter. This was left under our door. There was a British couple who were working in Munich. They worked at Bavarian Motor Works factory. They were living there, and they rented a room in the same house where the lady who owned the house rented the other room to guests who would come once in a while, and for the Olympics. So they did not know that we saw that game, the British couple, so they left this note under our door. But we had seen the game, but that was nice of them to leave that. To think this was written on September 10th, 1972, almost 50 years ago. And the next day I went to the final day of track and field events, and in a moment I'll show some of those photos. But one of them, in the stands, however, 2 of the spectators were 2 of the players on the U.S. basketball team right near me, and they were pretty upset still. They were very unhappy what had happened just hours before, and understandably. But they were now in the stadium watching the track events. The final day of track and field at the Munich Olympics, September 10th. There were 9 final events that day. Gold medal awarded to 9 different events, and 2 of those were won by the United States. The 4x100 meter relay. And also, I was very happy to see Frank Shorter become the first American since 1908, the first American in 64 years to win the Olympic marathon. And that made me very happy. Earlier that same year in April, on April 17th, 1972, I ran the famous Boston Marathon for the first time. And I ran that race 5 times between 1972 and 1976. So I was so happy in that same year where I ran my first marathon, and I was a runner for many years myself, took part in many road races. I was very happy to see Frank Shorter win the marathon in Munich. in a time of about 2 hours, 12 minutes. And here we have listed some of the events. The 1,500 meter race, that was won by a runner from Finland. And also Lassi Viren of Finland won the 5,000 meters. So at the end of that day, of the 9 gold medal events, 2 were won by the Soviet Union, 2 by the little country of Finland, and 2 by the United States. And the other 3, I think, were won by Great Britain, France, and West Germany. Here we have more events, and so here's some flags. The flags listed, some of the flags of different countries, and you can see the Israeli flag is flying at half-staff in honor of the 11 slain athletes just a few days before. And the equestrian events on September 11th. We went to that in the afternoon, and at that time at the Munich and Montreal Olympics, I also went to Montreal in 1976. I have another YouTube story on that on my channel. The last day was the equestrian and then the closing ceremony at nighttime. Now, we did not have a ticket for the closing in Munich. We watched that back at the guest house where we stayed, the closing ceremony. But in Montreal, 4 years later, the ticket I have entitled you to both the equestrian and the closing ceremony on the same day. And here's some more pictures of the Olympic Park around the main stadium area. And the founder of the modern Olympics was a Frenchman, Baron Pierre de Coubertin. And this is a quote by Pierre de Coubertin, the founder of the modern Olympics. Back in 1894, the International Olympic Committee was created, and 2 years later, the first modern games were held in Athens. And again, the Olympic flame here. So these are the photos I took, and here's some stamps I got later, some stamps in honor of those Munich Olympics. Well, 4 years later in Montreal, in 1976, I saw many more events, including 7 days of track and field. And Frank Shorter, America's greatest marathon runner, did well in those games too. He came in second for the silver medal. So in his 2 Olympics, he won gold and silver. 4 years after that, in 1980, here in Baltimore, I taught a course for a division of Johns Hopkins University called the Baltimore Free University. The first time I taught a course called History of the Modern Olympic Games. I gave that course in 1980, in 1984, and again 20 years later. I'm showing this brochure here. It was 2004, the last time I gave the course called History of the Modern Olympic Games for the Baltimore Free University of Johns Hopkins University. But when I first gave the course in 1980, about that time period, in the spring of 1980, Frank Shorter came to Baltimore. He was invited to speak at Towson University, but he also came to Johns Hopkins earlier that same day, and I happened to meet him right outside the gym at Johns Hopkins, near a statue of a discus thrower, another Olympic event, and I had his book with me because I was planning to go to the lecture at Towson as well a few hours later, but my luck was I met him at Johns Hopkins, and there were no people around him, so I knew it would be easier to get his autograph there rather than to lecture later at Towson later that night. I was very lucky, and he was kind to autograph his book, The Frank Shorter Story, and here is his autograph. This was on April 11th, 1980. Now, it's 42 years ago. He did write April 11th, 1980, to Phil, best of luck in everything you try, Frank Shorter, USA. And I'm so touched to have this autograph of America's greatest marathon runner ever, Frank Shorter, gold and silver medal at the 1972 and 1976 Olympic Games. It has now been 50 years since the Munich Olympics took place, half a century. And in fact, they actually took place from August 26th to September 11th, 1972. Ironically, those games ended on September 11th. No one then could realize that 29 September 11th later would be the single most famous terrorist event of all time in 2001, when close to 3,000 people died. We were watching some television in Germany at times, the German television networks. Of course, the ABC network covered the Munich Olympics in this country. Many years later, I was watching ABC. They were doing a replay, just like a 1 or 2 hour summary of the Munich Olympics. I saw the great reporter Jim McKay, who was from the Baltimore area, talk about those tragic events when the 11 Israeli athletes died. And at the end of his broadcast, he was on for 21 hours straight, almost a full day, and he simply said, they're all gone at the very end. Very sad event that athletes would be murdered at the Olympic Games. But the Munich Olympics, many great athletic performances as well. Mark Spitz winning 7 gold medals in swimming, Olga Korbut setting a new standard in gymnastics, and great runners like Lassi Viren of Finland and Frank Shorter of the United States. 50 years ago. This is Phil Easter, the amazing memory man. As the great CBS television newsman Edward R. Murrow said back in the 1950s, good night and good luck.